This year marks the 100th anniversary of a turning point in a very long struggle for Irish independence. Initially, the Easter Rising of 1916 met with repression from the British government and little support from the Irish public. But the uprising and British reaction strengthened a drive for independence that was formally declared in less than 3 years. Our guest has studied the history of Irish independence as part of his work for a doctor's degree in Irish history. He also works as an archivist for the city of Boston. We'd like to welcome John McColgan. Thank you very much for being with us, John.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
You know, you started studying this history at a very early age. Tell me how that came about.
Oh my, it took a long time ago. When I was 13 years old, my grandfather gave me a book that he had purchased in 1916. In fact, that was published later on in 1916. Called The Irish Rebellion of 1916 and Its Martyrs. It was a series of essays written by people who were associated with Ireland at the time, people like Padraig Colum, his wife Mary Colum, Maurice Joy, and other people who were associated with Ireland, many of them with the nationalist movement at the time.
Well, on the surface, this rising was a few hundred insurgents taking over some government buildings in Dublin, and then they get put down. A lot of them get hanged, and it didn't seem to be a victory at the time, at least for Irish independence. So, explain, why did this happen when it did?
Well, there was about 1,400 that actually came out, and they were shot. They were executed by firing squad, most of them. One person, Roger Casement, later on, he was involved in trying to get arms in Germany. He was hanged at the end of in the summer of 1916. But how did it come about? There had for many years been a revolutionary tradition in Irish politics. Up until the World War I. The constitutional movement was pretty much in control of the country, of politics in Ireland, the Irish Parliamentary Party under John Redmond, and people were expecting that there would be home rule. But by 1914, that home rule was being resisted. It was being resisted by the Conservative Party in the British Parliament. And they utilized the energies of the Ulster Loyalists in Northern Ireland to mount a movement against home rule. And the people of Ulster, who regard themselves as a separate nationality in Ireland, armed themselves, and British aristocratic military officers in the Curragh military camp in Kildare outside Dublin threatened to not obey any orders, to move against the Ulster Loyalists, to move against those people who were militarily organizing against an act of the British Parliament. And they pretty much, and there was almost a civil war in the United Kingdom. And that was prevented by the outbreak of World War I.
Because one of the other things that happened here right at that time was that people in the British government who occasionally advanced towards some kind of greater autonomy or independence for Ireland, they decided to link that with conscription, forcing soldiers to serve in World War I.
Oh yes, well the Irish population, the Irish nationalist population, certainly always resisted conscription, and it was after 1916, and after when the British suppressed the rising, and when they started shooting the leaders of it in ones and twos over the next few weeks, and just turned the political tide against Britain, against the UK government, and almost overnight, the leaders of the rebellion became almost like a pantheon, they became exalted, and so the political tide turned in favor of a more progressive form of nationalism, And when the British, at the end of, by 1917, 1918, when the ranks and the trenches were beginning to thin, turned to Ireland to try to round up more troops via conscription, the entire community in Ireland turned against them. There was an incredible alliance among not just Sinn Féin, the party that came out of 1916, the aftermath of 1916, Sinn Féin, the labor movement, the clergy, the bishops, everyone united against conscription. The unions held a railroad strike, and as a result, the British simply folded on that issue.
When I think of people at the South Boston St. Patrick's Day breakfast reading the famous poem by Yeats about the Rising, I mean, here we're just totally positive about it. This is a very Irish-American city, but when I look at what's going on over in Ireland, there's a little more ambivalence, and the way of observing this is almost a bit more subdued.
Well, I like what they're doing over there. They're looking at it in a very careful way. The government is saying we are not celebrating the Rising, we are commemorating it. And they want to be very careful because they understand that there are different traditions in Ireland that have to be respected. The head of the Northern Ireland government, Arlene Foster is her name, Democratic Unionist Party, traditionally totally anti-nationalist party, has come down to Dublin and sat with the folks in the South down there, expressing a willingness to study, to understand better what the Rising meant. On the other side, you've got McGuinness, who's the deputy premier up in Northern Ireland for Sinn Féin, saying we respect all traditions also, and we want to look at the Ulster Loyalists, the part that they played in the battle in World War I, and especially the Battle of the Somme in 1916, when thousands of them were slaughtered there. I mean, that's a very important event in the tradition in the history of the Ulster Unionists. So there was a lot of still a lot of extreme nationalism. There's a lot of stereotyping on both sides. There was one guy who was a Belfast extreme unionist city councillor, I think, who referred to the Rising as that grubby little rebellion down there. But so on the nationalist side, there's stuff like that as well. There's a lot of unwillingness to respect the British blood that was shed in 1916. So there's a lot of that kind of old-fashioned stereotyping and extreme nationalism that still exists. On the other hand, there are people who are willing to at least understand the mentality and the views and the opinions of other traditions on the island.
Well, aside from the angles of military action and even sectarian conflict, this is also part of a longer story about, I guess, maybe cultural awakening or recovery. Talk about that.
Well, sure. Well, Ireland, for centuries, was a colony. It was colonized. Land was property were expropriated by a foreign force, by a foreign people. Famine and immigration demoralized the Irish community. There was tremendous poverty over there. But revolutions happen when things start to get better. And indeed, there were some policies at the end of the 19th century. They called it killing home rule with kindness. They brought in measures to help to build the infrastructure of Ireland. They passed the Land Act, enabling people who the tenants to purchase the lands that they had farmed. And so things were starting to get better. So there was more energy, I guess, coming into the community. And I think that fostered a revival or an interest in Gaelic culture. Organizations like the Gaelic Athletic Association, the Gaelic League that promoted the Irish language. There was an arts and crafts movement. There's a wonderful exhibition up at Boston College on that. On the cultural side, then of course you have Yeats and Joyce and all the wonderful artists. John Millington Synge. There was a tremendous outpouring of Irish literature that pretty much exploded in the end of the 19th, early 20th century. So there are all these energies. It was like a revival of re-energizing of the Irish nation, as it were. There were many of these cultural, artistic, but also political forces and revolutionary forces that were all coming together at the same time. For, I would say, the liberation of Ireland, the expression of the identity of Ireland, the pride and the integrity of the Irish people.